The alien engineer had 6 arms, 12 degrees, and absolutely no idea why I was laughing at their impossible problem. The station's warning klaxons were still blaring when Chief Engineer Zxtal led us to the antimatter containment chamber. Their multiple arms were gesturing frantically at holographic displays, each showing more red warning signs than I'd seen since that incident with the quantum toaster back at MIT. As you can observe, Engineer Rodriguez, the containment field is degrading at an exponential rate, they chittered, mandibles clicking in distress. We've tried every solution in the Galactic Engineering Codex. Nothing works. Nothing. I exchanged a knowing look with Will, who was already pulling out his ancient paper notebook, a habit that never failed to puzzle aliens who'd long since abandoned physical writing. The corners of his mouth twitched as he started sketching. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "call me Lex. And how about you walk me through what you've tried so far?" Murphy's Law, our beloved ship, had picked up the distress call just as we were finishing breakfast. The Zenith Station, pride of the Galactic Alliance, and supposedly the most advanced structure in known space, was experiencing critical containment failures, the kind that ends with a very large boom and a very small debris field. As Zxtal explained their increasingly complex attempts to stabilize the containment field, I found myself drawn to the simplicity of the problem hiding beneath layers of overcomplicated solutions. It reminded me of something, tickling the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't quite reach. "Will," I interrupted Zxtal's technical monologue, "does this remind you of anything?" He glanced up from his notebook, where he'd been sketching what looked like an old submarine schematic. "You're thinking Cleveland, 2039. "Exactly," I snapped my fingers, earning a startled twitch from Zxtal's antennae. "The nuclear sub-reactor incident. They overcomplicated the solution then too." The alien engineer's compound eyes blinked in rapid succession. "I fail to understand the relevance of your primitive fission technology to our advanced antimatter containment systems." Will snorted, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Chief Zxtal, with all due respect, sometimes the oldest solutions are the best ones. The principles of containment haven't changed much in the last few centuries, just the scale and the materials." I was already pulling up the station's schematics on my datapad, my fingers dancing across the screen as I stripped away layers of complexity. "See, your system is actually fighting itself. All these redundancies and failsafes, they're creating feedback loops. It's like trying to stop a leak by adding more pipes." "Impossible," Zxtal protested, all 6 arms crossing in what I assumed was their species' version of indignation. "Our systems were designed by the finest minds in the galaxy." "That's probably the problem," Will muttered, loud enough for me to hear, but hopefully not loud enough for Zxtal's sensitive auditory organs to pick up. "Too many fine minds, not enough practical experience." I pulled up an old Earth schematic from my personal database. "Look here. This is how we solved containment issues back when we were first playing with nuclear power underwater. The principles are simple, elegant, and most importantly, they work." Zxtal's eyes focused on the schematic, their professional curiosity apparently overcoming their skepticism. "But this is primitive. There's no quantum stabilization, no probability field generators, no points of failure," I finished for them. "Sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. Will, what do you think? Can we adapt this for antimatter containment?" Will was already 3 pages deep into calculations. "Give me 10 minutes to convert the numbers for antimatter instead of nuclear material. We'll need to fabricate some parts, but nothing we can't handle with the station's manufacturing facilities." 10 minutes? Zxtal's voice rose to a pitch I hadn't thought possible for their species. "The containment field will fail in less than 3 hours." I grinned, already pulling tools from my utility vest. "Then we've got plenty of time. Trust me, Chief Zxtal, this is going to be fun." "Will, start fabricating. I'll prep the containment chamber for the modifications." As I headed toward the chamber's maintenance access, I heard Zxtal mutter something that their translator rendered as, "Humans are insane." Will's reply floated back, calm and assured. Insane? Nah. We just never learned what's supposed to be impossible. The maintenance access tunnel to the antimatter containment chamber was cramped, hot, and exactly where I needed to be. Sweat trickled down my back as I examined the quantum field generator's beautiful pieces of engineering that were trying way too hard to do a simple job. "How's it looking in there?" Will's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Like someone tried to kill a fly with a fusion bomb," I replied, running my hand along one of the primary conduits. "They've got 15 layers of quantum fields when 3 would do the job better." Classic overthinking. The fabricator was humming in the background as Will worked. "First batch of parts is almost ready. You sure about these specifications? They look almost insultingly simple compared to what's in there now." "That's the point." I pulled out my multi-tool and began disconnecting the outer layer of field generators. "Remember what Professor Chen used to say? Complexity is the enemy of reliability," Will quoted. Right before you rebuilt his quantum computer using parts from an old microwave. "And it worked better afterward," I said, grinning at the memory. "How's our friend ZXTAL holding up?" "Currently watching the fabrication process like they're expecting it to explode. All 6 arms twitching. It'd be funny if they weren't also sending urgent messages to what I assume is their version of a last will and testament." A warning light flashed on my heads-up display, showing another drop in containment stability. We still had 2 hours, but I didn't like the acceleration curve I was seeing. "Bring the first set of parts as soon as they're ready," I said, disconnecting another unnecessary component. "And grab some of that high-temp insulation tape from Murphy's Law. The good stuff, not the standard issue." "You want to use tape? On an antimatter containment system?" Will's voice carried that special tone reserved for when he thought I was being particularly human about a solution. "Trust me on this one." "Always do, even when I probably shouldn't." The next 20 minutes were a blur of careful deconstruction. With each layer I removed, I could feel the system breathing easier, like taking off 2 tight shoes after a long day. The aliens had built redundancy upon redundancy, each addition actually creating new potential points of failure. Will arrived with the first batch of parts just as I was removing the last unnecessary layer. He whistled low when he saw the pile of disconnected components. "Station management is going to have a fit when they see how much of their cutting-edge tech you just pulled out," he said, handing me the fabricated parts. They were elegant in their simplicity, curved plates of specialized alloy that would channel and contain the field much more efficiently than the quantum maze I just dismantled. "They can have a fit after we save their station," I replied, fitting the first plate into place. "Hand me that tape." Will passed over a roll of what looked like ordinary silver tape to anyone who didn't know better. In reality, it was a specialized polymer we'd developed after studying alien adhesive technology and deciding it was too complicated. The aliens had tried to buy the formula multiple times, but we kept it as our trade secret. "You know," Will said as he helped me secure the plate, "I've been thinking about why their system was failing in the first place." "Yeah," I grunted, stretching to reach a difficult angle. "Their quantum fields were too perfect. No flexibility. Like building a skyscraper without allowing for sway. First good wind would knock it down." I nodded, pleased he'd seen it too. "Exactly. They tried to force absolute control over quantum uncertainty." "Which is literally impossible," Will finished. "The more they tried to control it, the more chaos they created." I stepped back to admire our work. The new containment system looked almost primitive compared to what had been there before. But the readings were already showing improvement. Sometimes you need to work with nature, not against it. Another alarm blared, but this one was different, more urgent. "Lex," Will's voice was tense, "containment field just dropped another 12%. We've got maybe 40 minutes before critical failure." I tightened my tool belt. "Then we better work fast. Hand me the next plate. Time to show them how humans handle impossible deadlines." "You're doing what?" ZXTAL's translator couldn't quite capture the mix of horror and disbelief in their voice. but their rapidly changing skin color said it all. I was elbow deep in the final connections, sweat dripping onto my safety goggles as the containment field fluctuated around us. Creating a controlled leak, I repeated calmly, despite the countdown timer showing 23 minutes until catastrophic failure. A leak? In an antimatter containment system? All 6 of their arms were now pulling at their head frills in distress. That's impossible, Will suggested from where he was monitoring the readings. Like everything else we've done in the last hour. The growing crowd of alien engineers behind ZXDAL chittered nervously. We'd drawn quite an audience, apparently. News of the crazy humans dismantling the most advanced containment system in the galaxy had spread quickly through the station. The field is too rigid, I explained, making the final adjustments. Think of it like a balloon. If you inflate it with no way to release the pressure, it pops. But if you let it flex just a little, then it can handle much greater stress without failing, Will finished. Basic materials science. We figured this out centuries ago with nuclear reactors. I connected the last circuit and stepped back, checking the readings on my datapad. Okay, moment of truth. Will, start the sequence. The assembled alien engineers held their breath, or whatever passed for breathing in their respective species, as Will initiated our modified containment protocol. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the warning lights began to change from red to yellow, and finally, gloriously, to green. Containment field stabilizing, Will announced, allowing himself a small smile. Pressure decreasing. Field strength actually improving as the system finds its natural balance. Impossible, one of the alien engineers in the back muttered. The calculations, the theories, everything says this shouldn't work. I wiped my hands on my vest and grinned. Yeah, we get that a lot. But here's the thing about humans, we have a bad habit of not reading the manual that says what's impossible. ZXDAL was studying the readings with all 4 of their eye sets. The efficiency, it's actually better than our original specifications. How did you? Sometimes the best solution is the one that's been around the longest, Will said, already writing in his notebook. Your system was trying to enforce perfect control over quantum states. We just created a framework that lets physics do what it does naturally. Using principles from primitive nuclear submarines, another engineer added, their tone somewhere between accusation and awe. Hey, I shrugged. If it works, it works. Though we did add a few modern touches. That tape holding the plates together? That's actually a quantum-stabilized polymer of our own design. Tape? ZXDAL's translator crackled with static, apparently unable to process the concept. You used adhesive strips on a critical containment system? Don't worry, Will said dryly, it's really good tape. The station's main AI chose that moment to announce, containment field stability at 112% of design capacity. All systems nominal. Crisis averted. A cheer went up from the gathered engineers, though I noticed most of them still looked confused about exactly how we'd accomplished the impossible. ZXDAL approached us, their professional dignity warring with obvious curiosity. The Galactic Engineering Council will want a full report on this. Unconventional solution, they said. Will held up his notebook. Already documented, though I doubt they'll believe it at first. They never do. Speaking of documentation, I added, pulling out my invoice tablet, about our fee. The station will pay whatever you ask, ZXDAL said quickly. Though I must know, was this truly just another Tuesday maintenance call for you? I thought about all the other impossible problems we'd solved, all the times we'd shown up somewhere in Murphy's Law to find panicking aliens and supposedly unsolvable issues. Pretty much, I replied. Though I have to admit, this one was fun. Most places we visit don't have such an appreciative audience. As we headed back to our ship, Will's notebook already full of new observations, I could hear the alien engineers behind us starting to argue about the implications of our solution. Someone was insisting that the Galactic Engineering Codex would need to be updated. You know, Will said as we walked, One of these days we should write our own engineering manual. Call it the Human Guide to Impossible Solutions or something. I laughed. Nobody would believe it. Besides, where's the fun in that? I prefer letting them think it's impossible right up until we prove it isn't. Fair point. Back to Murphy's Law? I heard there's a station in the Carina sector having trouble with their gravity generators. Gravity problems, I grinned. Now that sounds like a perfect way to spend a Tuesday afternoon. 6 different species said the planetary shield couldn't be fixed without parts that would take 3 weeks to arrive. We'll bet them his coffee stash we'd do it in 3 hours. I was already regretting letting him make that bet. The shield generator facility stretched out before us like a massive technological graveyard, its crystalline spires flickering with failing power. Above us, through the transparent dome of the control center, the angry red giant star seemed to pulse menacingly. You just had to bet the good coffee, I muttered, scanning through the facility's schematics on my datapad. The real Earth-grown stuff? Do you know how hard it is to get authentic coffee out here? Will didn't even look up from his diagnostic panel. Less complaining, more impossible problem solving. Solar flares hit in 2 hours and 43 minutes. The facility's chief administrator, a tall crystalline being named SX Rith, hovered anxiously nearby. Their transparent body refracted the emergency lights in a way that was starting to give me a headache. The shield must be at least at 60% capacity when the flares hit, they chimed, their voice like breaking glass. Anything less and the colony's surface infrastructure will be devastated. Millions will die. No pressure then, I said, zooming in on a particular section of the schematics. Will, come look at this. Remind you of anything? He moved to peer over my shoulder, then let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. It's just like the old satellite arrays back home. Different tech, same basic principle. Exactly. I was already pulling equipment from my vest pockets. Their fancy quantum shield is basically just a really big deflector dish. And what do we humans know about dishes? Will's face split into a grin. We spent centuries pointing them at the sky before we ever left Earth. SX Rith's crystalline form vibrated with confusion. I don't understand. Your primitive communication technology has no relevance to our planetary defense systems. That's where you're wrong, I said, already heading for the maintenance access. Everything old is new again. Will, get up to Murphy's Law and grab every spare communications array we've got, even the broken ones, and the signal boosters from the cargo hold. The ones we were supposed to deliver to that mining colony. They can wait. This is more important. The clients won't like that. They'll like being alive more. I turned to SX Rith. I need access to your manufacturing facilities and every piece of conductive material you can find, especially metals. The administrator's form clouded with doubt. But the shield requires quantum-aligned crystals to function. Metal is too primitive. Trust me, I said, pulling out my multi-tool. Sometimes primitive is exactly what you need. Will, get moving. And don't you dare lose my coffee. As we jogged off toward our ship, I began dismantling the nearest failed shield projector. Under all the fancy quantum technology and crystalline components, these were basically just giant signal repeaters. The aliens had overcomplicated a simple solution, as usual. Administrator, I called out, get your people ready to move fast. We're about to perform what humans like to call a quick and dirty fix. Quick and dirty. Their translator seemed to struggle with the concept. It means we're going to break several laws of engineering, probably violate a few galactic safety protocols, and definitely void some warranties. But we're going to save your colony. As I worked, I could see the star pulsing above us, counting down the minutes until it unleashed its fury. But for the first time since we'd landed, I was smiling. Because sometimes the best solutions aren't about having the most advanced technology. Sometimes they're about remembering the basics that got us to the stars in the first place. You want to do what with my quantum focusing crystals? The facility's head engineer, A floating cloud of ionized gas named Vex crackled with electrical discharge that I chose to interpret as outrage. I was already dismantling the third shield projector, surrounded by a growing pile of repurposed parts. Will had returned from Murphy's Law with our communications equipment and was busy modifying the arrays with his usual efficiency. Think of them as really fancy signal boosters, I explained, carefully extracting another crystal. We're going to create a resonance cascade using old Earth satellite principles. The crystals will amplify the effect. That's not what they're designed for. Vex's form condensed into a tight, agitated ball. Story of my life, I muttered, then louder. Will, how's that framework coming? He gestured to the skeletal structure taking shape around us. We'd repurposed structural supports to create a massive dish-shaped array, with our salvaged communication equipment forming the backbone. It looked like something from Earth's early space age, just scaled up about 1,000 times. Basic structure's done, he called back. Starting to lay the conductive pathways now. 1 hour and 52 minutes until the flares hit. The entire facility had become a hive of activity. Alien workers scurried about under Will's direction, carrying materials and following his surprisingly simple instructions. I had to admit, he was good at making the impossible sound reasonable. The principle is basic wave physics, I explained to Vex while splicing together power conduits. Your quantum shield was trying to create a perfect barrier, but what we really need is deflection and dispersal. Like a satellite dish reflecting signals? Administrator SX Rith chimed in, their crystalline form now clouded with what I hoped was understanding rather than despair. Exactly, I pointed at them with my multi-tool. See, they get it. Now, instead of trying to block the solar flares, we're going to catch them and redirect them. The quantum crystals will amplify our dish's effect, creating a dispersal field that should protect the whole colony. Should? Vex crackled ominously. Will, what's our current success probability? I called out. He checked his notebook, where complex calculations covered several pages. According to my math, about 68%. According to standard engineering principles, 0, because this shouldn't be possible. I love those odds, I grinned, connecting another power relay. A warning klaxon blared, and the angry red star above us pulsed more intensely. The facility's AI announced in multiple languages, 1 hour until solar flare impact. All non-essential personnel please proceed to underground shelters. Lex, Will called out, his voice tense. We've got a problem with the power distribution. The conventional circuits can't handle the load we need. I wiped sweat from my forehead, leaving a streak of grime. Show me. He led me to the main power junction, where our improvised system connected to the facility's grid. The cables were already hot to the touch. We need more conductivity, but we've used all the high-grade materials. I stared at the problem for a moment, then reached into my vest and pulled out a sealed package. Will's eyes widened when he saw it. Is that the quantum-stabilized tape? Yes. I started unrolling it. The same stuff we used on the antimatter containment last week. That's our last roll, he warned. Better than losing your coffee stash. I began wrapping the connections. This stuff doesn't just hold things together, it's one of the best conductors we've ever created. The aliens just don't know it because they've never thought to use adhesive strips for power transmission. As if on cue, Vex floated closer, their gaseous form rippling with curiosity. You're using binding material to conduct power. That's impossible, Will and I said in unison. Actually, I continued, finishing the last connection, humanity's been using weird conductors since before we split the atom. Will, power it up. Let's see if this works. The improvised array hummed to life, our hybrid of human ingenuity and alien technology creating something entirely new. Above us, the star continued its countdown, oblivious to the race against time playing out below. 53 minutes to impact, the AI announced cheerfully. I squared my shoulders and grabbed my tools. Right then. Time for the hard part. Impact in 5 minutes, the AI announced with the same cheerful tone it had used all day. I was beginning to suspect it had been programmed by someone with a dark sense of humor. Our massive improvised array dominated the facility's central chamber, looking like something out of Earth's technological adolescence had mated with advanced alien tech. The quantum crystals we'd repurposed glowed with internal light, positioned at key points throughout the dish's structure. Power levels holding at 87%, Will called out from his monitoring station. Resonance cascade is stable, though I have no idea how. Sometimes it's better not to ask, I replied, making final adjustments to the control interface, a jury-rigged combination of alien tech and an old tablet I kept for exactly this kind of situation. Vex, how's our coverage looking? The gaseous engineer had finally stopped crackling with anxiety and was now floating near the main displays. The field extends beyond colonial boundaries, but these readings cannot be correct. I glanced at the numbers and grinned. Oh, they're correct. We're actually getting better coverage than your original shield. Turns out quantum crystals work more efficiently when you don't try to force them into rigid patterns. 3 minutes to impact, the AI chirped. The massive red star above us was visibly churning now, its surface rippling with the building's solar flare. Through the facility's dome, we could see the colony spread out below millions of lives depending on our improvised solution. You know, Will said conversationally, if this doesn't work, we're going to be the first ones to know. Thanks for that cheerful thought. I finished the last sequence of commands. Everyone ready? This is going to look interesting. Administrator Sxrith's crystalline form vibrated with nervous energy. Define interesting. 2 minutes to impact. You might want to dim the dome's transparency, I suggested. This is going to get bright. The first waves of solar radiation began washing over the planet's upper atmosphere, creating spectacular auroral displays. Our sensors showed the flare building to levels that would fry everything on the surface if we hadn't been here. 1 minute to impact. I took a deep breath. Will, start the power sequence. He began the startup procedure we designed in the last hour, his fingers dancing over the controls with practiced precision. The array hummed louder, quantum crystals pulsing in harmony with our modified communications equipment. 30 seconds. The star seemed to bulge, its angry red surface preparing to belch forth enough energy to scour the planet's surface. Around us, alien engineers held their breath or equivalent biological functions. 15 seconds. Will, I said quietly, if this doesn't work, I'm sorry about your coffee. 10 seconds. Worth it, he replied, not taking his eyes off the readings. Sometimes you have to bet big. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The solar flare erupted, a massive wall of plasma and radiation hurtling toward the planet. The dome's filters barely dimmed the blinding light. This was the moment of truth. Our array sprang to life, the quantum crystals blazing with captured energy. The massive dish began to glow, creating a field that spread outward like ripples in a pond. When the flare hit, something beautiful happened. Instead of trying to block the energy, our system caught it, redirected it, spread it out in a dazzling display of light and power. The quantum crystals sang with energy, using the very force of the flare to strengthen our protective field. Field strength at 112%, Will shouted over the humming. Dispersion pattern holding, coverage is complete. Through the dome, we watched as the deadly solar energy was caught and redirected, spreading harmlessly into space in a spectacular light show. The colony below was completely protected, and our improvised shield was actually growing stronger as it worked. Impossible, Vex whispered, their gaseous forms swirling with amazement. No, I corrected, watching our creation perform exactly as intended. Just human engineering. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. As the flare subsided, leaving our shield humming contentedly, Will pulled out his notebook and began writing. The Galactic Engineering Council is going to have fits about this one. Let them, I said, already thinking about how to make the modification permanent. By the way, you won your bet. 3 hours and 12 minutes from start to finish. So I get to keep my coffee. And then some. I think our friends here owe us a substantial bonus for this solution. Administrator SX Rith's crystalline form had taken on a rainbow hue that I assumed meant joy. The colony will provide whatever compensation you request. Though, might we also request documentation of this remarkable solution? Already done, Will said, holding up his notebook. Though I should warn you, most aliens find our methods disturbingly simple. Simple but effective, I added, patting the array affectionately. Now, who's up for a cup of real Earth coffee while we install the permanent modifications? The museum curator nearly fainted when I pulled out a 2025 iPhone to interface with their priceless alien artifact. In fairness to Chief Curator Valara, they had good reason to be concerned. The artifact in question was the last known memory core from the legendary precursor civilization, containing potentially thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. And here I was, approaching it with what they considered a primitive antique. This device is barely quantum capable. Valara's feathers rippled in distress, their avian features contorting in what I'd learned was their species' expression of horror. The memory core requires the most advanced quantum interfaces to even attempt connection. Will was setting up our diagnostic equipment nearby, occasionally glancing at the glowing crystal matrix that housed the precursor data. And how's that been working out so far? The curator's feathers drooped. 17 attempts, all failed. The data structure is incomprehensible to our most advanced systems. Because you're trying too hard, I said, carefully examining the crystal matrix. Will, does this pattern remind you of anything? He stepped closer, squinting through his old-school glasses. Well, I'll be damned. It's just like early magnetic storage, we said simultaneously. The gathered team of xenoarchaeologists chittered amongst themselves. They'd been trying to access the memory core for months, ever since it was discovered in the ruins of a precursor facility deep under the surface of an abandoned world. Magnetic storage? Valara's translator struggled with a concept. But this is a quantum crystal matrix of unprecedented complexity. That's what everyone always assumes, I said, pulling up old schematics on my iPhone. But sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. The precursors might have been advanced, but they still had to follow the basic laws of information storage. Will was already connecting our diagnostic tools to the crystal matrix. The pattern is complex because it's layered, like old hard drive platters. Each layer stores data in a slightly different format, but the basic principle is the same. And that's why your quantum interfaces failed, I added, showing Valara my screen. You were trying to read everything at once, in the most complicated way possible. We need to go layer by layer, starting with the basics. Using that? They gestured at my phone with one trembling wing. This primitive device has something your quantum computers don't, I grinned. Backwards compatibility. Humans never completely abandoned our old technologies, we just built on them. This phone can read everything from magnetic tape to quantum states. And more importantly, Will added, it doesn't make assumptions about how data should be stored. It just reads what's there. A warning light flashed on the crystal matrix's containment field. The core had been slowly degrading since its discovery, losing data bit by bit. We had maybe 6 hours before critical sections began to fail. All right, I said, connecting my phone to Will's diagnostic setup. Let's see what secrets the precursors left behind. Just like reading an old hard drive, except this one might contain the collected knowledge of one of the most advanced civilizations in galactic history. No pressure, Will muttered, beginning the scanning sequence. Just try not to drop your phone this time. That was one time, and we were being shot at, I protested, watching as the first layer of data began to resolve on our screens. Besides, this is going to be easy. What could possibly go wrong? The crystal matrix pulsed with ancient light, and the first fragments of precursor code began to appear. Well, that's not good, I muttered, staring at the streams of data flowing across my phone screen. We were 2 hours into the process, and things had just gotten complicated. "Define not good," Will said without looking up from his diagnostics. He was tracking the crystal matrix's degradation, which had accelerated in the last 30 minutes. Remember how we thought this was like old magnetic storage? Turns out it's more like if someone took every storage medium humans ever invented and scrambled them together. I showed him my screen. "Look at this pattern." He whistled low. "Is that binary, quantum states, and something I've never seen before, all encoded in the same data stream?" "Yeah," I ran a hand through my hair. The precursors weren't just storing data, they were storing the same data in multiple formats simultaneously. Valara hovered nearby, their feathers shifting anxiously. "Can you decode it?" "Yes and no," I said. "We can read about 30% of it using standard methods. The quantum stuff we can probably figure out, but this third format..." I trailed off, studying the strange patterns. 4 hours until critical degradation, Will reminded me. The crystal matrix's glow had taken on an uneven quality, sections flickering as ancient data pathways began to fail. I paced around the artifact, my mind racing. The precursors had been advanced, yes, but they weren't gods. They had to work with the same laws of physics we did. So why encode the same data 3 different ways? Then it hit me. "Will," I said slowly, "what's the one problem every civilization faces with long-term data storage?" He looked up, realization dawning in his eyes. "Compatibility. No matter how advanced you are, you can't predict how future technology will develop." "Exactly," I turned to Valara. The precursors weren't being redundant, they were being thorough. They encoded their knowledge in multiple formats to ensure that whoever found it would be able to read at least part of it. But why these specific formats? The curator's feathers ruffled in confusion. "Because they're the logical progression of data storage," Will explained, already modifying our interface. "Binary is the simplest possible way to encode information. Quantum states represent the next major step, and this third format must be their attempt to predict the next evolution in data storage," I finished. "We can't read it because it hasn't been invented yet, at least not by us." Valara's translator crackled as they processed this. "But how does this help us save the data?" I held up my phone with a grin. "Because humans never throw anything away. We've got binary readers, quantum interfaces, and most importantly, we know how to convert between formats." 3 hours 40 minutes, Will warned. "Right." I connected my phone to the main interface. "We can't read everything, but we can save what we can understand and preserve the rest for future decoding." "Will, start writing a conversion protocol. We need to translate everything into a format our storage systems can handle." "Already on it." His fingers flew over the controls. "But we'll need more storage space than we have available." I turned to Valara. "How fast can you get every data storage device in the museum up here? And I mean everything, the older the better." The curator's feathers flattened in determination. "I'll have my team strip every exhibit if necessary." As they hurried away, I started modifying my phone's interface. We'd need to create a bridge between ancient alien technology and human storage systems, something that had probably never been attempted before. "You know," Will said conversationally as we worked, "most people would say this is impossible." I smiled, watching the first successfully converted data streams flow into our makeshift storage array. Good thing we're not most people. The crystal matrix pulsed again, more sections flickering. We were in a race against time, trying to preserve the knowledge of an ancient civilization using technology that spanned millennia of development. Just another impossible Tuesday. "You want me to do what with the museum's primary quantum computer?" Valara's translator couldn't quite capture the mix of disbelief and horror in their voice. "Turn it off," I repeated, not looking up from where I was connecting a daisy chain of storage devices that spanned 3 centuries of human data technology. "It's interfering with the conversion process." We had 45 minutes left before the crystal matrix reached critical degradation. Around us, the museum's storage room looked like a technological yard sale. Everything from modern quantum drives to restored magnetic tape units was linked together in what we'll like to call a storage soup. But our quantum computer is the most advanced in the sector. Valara's feathers were practically vibrating with distress. And that's the problem, Will explained, monitoring the data flow. It's trying to optimize the conversion process. We need raw, unfiltered data transfer. I nodded, connecting another set of drives. Sometimes the best solution is to let the data flow naturally, like water finding its own path. Your quantum computer is trying to build a perfect pipeline, but we need a river. The crystal matrix gave another ominous pulse, and more warning lights flickered on our displays. We'd managed to save about 60% of the readable data, but the degradation was accelerating. 30 minutes, Will announced, and we've got a new problem. The binary sections are starting to corrupt faster than we can copy them. I swore under my breath. Valara, kill the quantum computer. Now. This time they didn't argue, rushing to the control panel. The moment the quantum computer powered down, our readings changed dramatically. There, I pointed at the display. See how the data patterns are stabilizing? The quantum interference was actually accelerating the degradation. Will adjusted our conversion protocols. Data flow improving. We might actually pull this off. I moved to the crystal matrix, studying its flickering surface. The precursors had built this to last millennia, encoding their knowledge in ways they hoped future civilizations would understand. They probably hadn't imagined it would be saved by technology that their contemporaries would have considered primitive. 20 minutes, Will called out. Binary transfer at 85%. Quantum data at 70%. Unknown format. Still unknown, but we're recording the raw patterns for later analysis. Valara watched our improvised storage system with a mixture of fascination and concern. Even if we save the data, how will we access it later? This setup is unconventional, I suggested, checking connections. Don't worry, human storage systems are like Russian nesting dolls. Each one can read the formats that came before it. Once we have the data secured, we can take our time translating it properly. 10 minutes. The crystal matrix was barely holding together now, its once steady glow reduced to a flickering pulse. But our storage array was humming along, centuries of human technology working together to preserve the knowledge of an ancient civilization. Binary transfer complete, Will announced. Quantum data at 92%. Unknown format patterns recorded. 5 minutes until critical failure. I watched the final data streams flow through our system, transforming from alien patterns into formats we could understand. It was beautiful in a weird, technological way. Transfer complete. Will's voice carried both triumph and disbelief. All readable data secured. Unknown format patterns preserved for future study. Just in time. The crystal matrix gave one final pulse before its light faded completely, its ancient knowledge now preserved in a mix of human storage devices spanning hundreds of years of technological development. Valara stared at our storage array in amazement. You saved it, using technology that predates our civilization's first space flight. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, I said, carefully disconnecting my phone from the interface. The precursors understood that. That's why they encoded their data in multiple formats. Speaking of formats, Will said, already making notes. The patterns we couldn't read? I have a theory about those. Oh, I raised an eyebrow. I think they're not just a future storage format. I think they're instructions for building whatever comes next. He showed me his calculations. The precursors weren't just preserving their knowledge, they were leaving breadcrumbs for technological development. I grinned. Now that sounds like a challenge for another day. I turned to Valara. Your museum just became the owner of the largest collection of preserved precursor data in known space. Might want to update your exhibits. And maybe, Will added with a smile, Add a small display about human data storage technology. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. Valara's feathers rippled with what I hoped was amusement. I believe we can arrange that, though I suspect future visitors will find it difficult to believe this story. That's okay, I said, pocketing my phone. The best stories usually are. Will just suggested we could fix the galaxy's most advanced AI using the principles of a 1980s Nintendo. The best part? He wasn't joking. The central processing chamber of the Galactic Traffic Control Hub stretched around us like a cathedral built from light and data. Holographic streams of information flowed through the air, representing millions of ships moving through thousands of systems. And at the heart of it all, the hub's AI was having what could only be described as a nervous breakdown. Another cascade failure in Sector 7. Controller Zena's multiple eyes blinked in rapid succession across their crystalline face. 3 more ships forced into emergency FTL drops. That's the 6th failure in the last hour, Will muttered, studying the diagnostic readouts. The pattern's getting worse. I watched as another stream of data suddenly twisted, forcing a whole convoy of ships to redirect. The AI was supposed to coordinate all faster-than-light travel in this sector of the galaxy, preventing ships from colliding in hyperspace or emerging too close to gravitational bodies. Right now, it was doing about as well as a drunk traffic cop at a fusion reactor convention. Have you tried turning it off and on again? I asked, mostly to watch Zena's eyes all blink in horror simultaneously. The hub AI cannot be deactivated, they practically shrieked. Millions of ships depend on its calculations. The economic damage alone would... Relax, Will interrupted, not looking up from his ancient paper notebook where he was sketching something. He's just being human. But I think I see the problem. I moved to look over his shoulder. The page was filled with his precise handwriting and what looked like. Is that a diagram of the original Nintendo Entertainment System's graphics processor? Yep. He pointed to a particular section. See the similarity? I studied the sketch, then looked at the holographic representation of the eyes processing architecture floating above us. Well, I'll be damned. It's doing the same thing. What thing? Zena hovered closer, their crystalline form refracting the data streams around us. What could your primitive gaming device possibly have in common with our advanced AI? Parallel processing overload, Will and I said simultaneously. I pulled up the hub specifications on my datapad. Your AI is trying to process every possible ship trajectory simultaneously, calculating all potential outcomes in real time. But it's not prioritizing or filtering the data properly. Just like when too many sprites overwhelm the Nintendo's graphics processor, Will added. The system tries to render everything at once instead of focusing on what's actually important. Another alarm blared as a data stream kinked, forcing more ships to redirect. We had maybe 2 hours before the cascade failures reached critical mass and ships started actually colliding in hyperspace. The solution is simple, I said, already pulling tools from my vest. We need to teach your AI how to think more like a 1980s video game console. Zena's crystalline form clouded with what I assumed was confusion. You want to? Downgrade our AI. Not downgrade, Will corrected, reaching for his diagnostic kit. Optimize. Sometimes the old solutions are the best solutions. I grinned, cracking my knuckles. Time to show this AI the power of human inefficiency, and maybe save a few million ships in the process. The hub's central chamber hummed around us, its AI struggling to maintain order in the celestial dance of starships. Above us, through the transparent dome, the galaxy spun on, unaware that its traffic control system was about to get a very retro upgrade. Just promise me one thing, Will said as we prepared to interface with the eye's core systems. What's that? No making it play Super Mario Bros. Explain to me again why you're installing what appears to be a primitive limiting algorithm into our quantum AI. The hub's chief engineer, a towering insectoid named RX Stick, clicked their mandibles nervously as they watched our work. Because, I said, deep in the eye's base code, sometimes you need to think less to think better. Will, how is that priority matrix coming? Will was simultaneously writing in his notebook and typing on his datapad, which was interfaced with the eye's secondary systems. Almost done. You know, it's fascinating their quantum processors are actually too efficient. Too efficient? Zena and RX Stick asked in unison. Look at it this way, I explained, not pausing in my work. Imagine trying to catch a ball. Do you calculate every possible trajectory, air resistance variable, and gravitational influence before moving your hand? Of course, RX Stick clicked. How else would one catch a ball? Will and I exchanged a knowing look. And that's exactly the problem, I continued. Humans do it through approximation and intuition. We filter out the unnecessary data automatically. Your AI is trying to calculate everything perfectly, all the time. Another alarm blared Sector 12 this time. More ships forced to drop out of FTL. More chaos in the carefully orchestrated dance of interstellar traffic. 1 hour until system-wide failure, the AI announced pleasantly, seemingly unaware of its own impending breakdown. Watch this, Will said, implementing his first set of changes. A holographic display showed a small section of space where ships were moving smoothly again. See, by limiting the variables it considers for each calculation, the AI can process traffic flow more efficiently. But the calculations won't be perfect. RX Stick's antennae twitched in distress. They don't need to be perfect, I said, implementing my own modifications. They just need to be good enough. A ship doesn't need to know the gravitational influence of every star in the galaxy, just the ones that could actually affect its course. Like a video game sprite doesn't need to track every pixel on the screen, Will added, just the ones it might actually collide with. I watched as more sectors began to stabilize under our modifications. The AI was learning to prioritize, to filter, to approximate just like those old gaming systems had to do with their limited resources. 45 minutes until system-wide failure, the AI announced, though now its voice carried a slight note of uncertainty. Want to bet we can do it in 30? I asked Will. He didn't look up from his work, but I could see him smile. Those ships out there are carrying an awful lot of coffee. Better make it 20. The chamber hummed around us as we raced against time, teaching a quantum AI how to think more like a primitive computer. Sometimes, I reflected, the most advanced solution isn't always the best one. Sometimes you just need to remember how to play the game. By all known laws of quantum computing, this should not be working, RX Stick declared, watching as sector after sector returned to normal operations. Yet it is, I finished, making final adjustments to the priority algorithms. Will, status? 28 sectors stabilized, 9 to go. He was monitoring the massive holographic display, where streams of data now flowed smoothly like well-orchestrated rivers of light. The eye's processing load is down to 12% of previous levels. We'd been at it for 18 minutes, and the transformation was remarkable. Where before the AI had been drowning in its own calculations, now it moved through its tasks with almost elegant efficiency. I've been analyzing your modifications, Zena said, their crystalline form shimmering with what I'd learned to recognize as excitement. You've essentially taught our AI to guess? We prefer the term predictive approximation, I said, grinning. But basically, yes. Instead of calculating every possible outcome, it now focuses on the most likely scenarios. Like a human catching a ball, Will added. We don't calculate trajectories, we predict where the ball will be based on experience and basic physics. Your AI is now doing the same thing, just at a galactic scale. The chamber's atmosphere had changed. The frantic energy of crisis had been replaced by something almost peaceful. Through the transparent dome above, we could see ships moving in their celestial dance, their paths now smooth and coordinated. Final sector stabilizing, Will announced. 19 minutes and 27 seconds total. Not bad for a solution based on 1980s gaming technology. I was about to respond when the AI spoke, its voice somehow different than before. Query: why do I feel less burdened? Everyone froze. The AI had never asked a question before. That's because you're not trying to think of everything at once, I explained, approaching the central interface. You're learning to prioritize, to filter, to play the game, the AI suggested. Will dropped his notebook. I couldn't help but laugh. Yes, exactly. Just like a video game has to decide which elements are important enough to render, you're now deciding which calculations are actually necessary. This is unprecedented, RxStick clicked, antennae waving in agitation. The AI was not programmed for this kind of adaptive learning. No, Will said, retrieving his notebook. But by simplifying its processing approach, we gave it room to develop new pathways. Sometimes limitations breed creativity. The AI was silent for a moment, its presence filling the chamber with a contemplative hum. Then, I have reviewed your modifications. The programming is elegant in its inefficiency. I believe I understand now why humans are often able to solve problems that more advanced systems cannot. Oh, I raised an eyebrow. And why's that? You embrace imperfection as a feature, not a flaw. Query: would it be possible to learn more about these video games? For research purposes, of course. Will shot me a warning look. Don't you dare. But I was already pulling an emulator from my datapad. Well, since you asked, how would you like to try something called Tetris? It's all about efficient space management. As I set up the game, I could hear Will muttering about violating protocols and corrupting eyes. But the way I saw it, we just taught the galaxy's most advanced traffic control system to think more like a human. Teaching it to play video games seemed like the logical next step. Just remember, I told the AI as the first blocks began to fall. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most perfect one. It's the one that gets the job done while having a little fun along the way. Understood, the AI replied. Query: is this what humans call holding my beer? Will groaned. I grinned. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space above us, millions of ships continued their dance, guided by an AI that had learned the value of thinking less and playing more. Just another impossible problem solved the human way. The Galactic Council called it a crisis. We called it an opportunity to show why humans always keep duct tape handy. The council chamber was in chaos. Representatives from 17 different species were talking, shouting, or emitting various forms of distress signals all at once. Above the central platform, a holographic display showed the spreading disaster. Transportation networks across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy were failing simultaneously. If we cannot restore functionality within 6 hours, first speaker in Extara's telepathic voice cut through the chaos. 37% of galactic civilization will lose access to essential resources. Will was already writing in his notebook, sketching diagrams I recognized from Earth's early transportation history. Notice anything familiar about the failure pattern? I studied the holographic display, watching the cascade of red warning indicators spread like a virus through the galaxy's transportation grid. It's like the London Underground shutdown of 2031. Exactly, he said, not looking up. Complex systems failing because they're too interconnected. No redundancy, no analog backup. No human factor, we said together. The first speaker's crystalline form shifted toward us. Explain. I stepped forward, pulling up historical data on my datapad. Your transportation network is too perfect. Every system depends on every other system working flawlessly. The moment one part fails, everything fails, Will finished. Humans learned this lesson centuries ago. That's why we still keep manual overrides on everything. And duct tape, I added, patting my utility vest where a roll of our quantum-stabilized adhesive strips waited. Never underestimate the power of a good temporary fix. Another section of the network turned red on the display. The chamber erupted in fresh waves of panic. 5 hours, 42 minutes until critical failure. the chamber's AI announced helpfully. And Extara's mental voice carried a mix of desperation and skepticism. You propose to save the most advanced transportation network ever created using adhesive strips and primitive manual controls. No, I said, grinning as I saw Will already sketching out our solution. We propose to save it by making it worse. Worse? The word echoed through the chamber as various translation devices struggled with the concept. Sometimes, Will explained, showing me his diagram, the best way to fix a perfect system is to make it a little less perfect. I nodded, already seeing where he was going with this. We're going to teach your network how to fail properly. The chamber fell silent, all 17 species staring at us like we'd just suggested solving a quantum physics problem with interpretive dance. Which, now that I thought about it, might actually work under the right circumstances. First speaker, I said, we're going to need access to every manual override in the system, and all the duct tape we can get our hands on. Will closed his notebook with a snap. Time to show the galaxy why humans still believe in backup plans. Above us, the holographic display continued to turn red, counting down the hours until civilization began to crumble. But for the first time since we'd entered the chamber, I was smiling. Sometimes the best solutions aren't about making things work perfectly. They're about making them work at all. You want us to intentionally shut down functioning sections of the network. The transportation minister, a gaseous being named VXHAL, condensed into a tight, agitated ball. That's madness. No, Will said, not looking up from where he was reprogramming a network node. That's fire breaks. Basic wildfire control, just applied to data networks. We were in the central control hub, surrounded by walls of holographic displays showing the spreading cascade of failures. I was elbow-deep in the manual override systems, installing what I like to call human-style emergency protocols. Look, I explained, connecting another bypass circuit. Your network is failing because every system is trying to compensate for every other system. They're all linked together in one perfect, unified whole. As they should be, VXHAL pulsed indignantly. Maximum efficiency is your enemy right now, Will interrupted. You need controlled failure points, places where the system can break safely instead of taking everything down with it. I nodded, sealing another connection with our quantum-stabilized tape. Like how Earth cities build flood channels to control where water goes during a storm. Right now, your network is all city and no channels. 4 hours until critical failure, the hub's AI announced cheerfully. The massive chamber hummed with energy as we worked. Teams of alien engineers followed our instructions, though I could tell by their various expressions of horror that they thought we were insane. They probably weren't entirely wrong. Minister, Will said, finishing another modification. How many backup systems does your network have? Backups, VXHAL swirled in confusion. The system is perfect. It doesn't need. Everything needs backups, I cut in. Humans learned that lesson the hard way, multiple times, usually while screaming. Will pulled up a historical display on his datapad. Earth, 2031, London Underground. The automated system failed, but they kept the trains running using radio communications and manual signals. Primitive, one of the alien engineers muttered. Primitive worked, I replied, testing another override. Which is more than we can say for your perfect system right now. Another section of the network turned red on the main display. But this time, something different happened. The failure stopped at one of our fire breaks, contained by the manual overrides we'd installed. It's working, Will announced, allowing himself a small smile. Sector 7 is isolated. The failure can't spread past the breakpoint. I watched as our modifications began to take effect across the network. Where before the failures had cascaded unchecked, now they hit walls of intentional inefficiency, places where the system could fail gracefully instead of catastrophically. 3 hours, 45 minutes until critical failure, the AI updated. "Want to bet we can have manual control restored to the essential systems in 2?" I asked Will, He glanced at his notebook, where complex calculations covered several pages. Make it 1.5. I'm getting hungry, and I heard there's a good noodle place in the lower levels. VXHAL's gaseous form swirled in what might have been despair. You're treating this crisis like just another Tuesday, I suggested, sealing another override with tape. That's because it is. Humans deal with impossible problems all the time. We've gotten pretty good at it. Besides, Will added, sometimes you need to break things a little to fix them properly. Above us, the network continued its dance of failure and containment, as we taught the most advanced transportation system in the galaxy the value of imperfection. And somewhere in the lower levels, noodles were waiting. You used adhesive strips to repair a quantum transmission node? The first speaker's mental voice carried a mix of horror and fascination as they reviewed our final modifications. Quantum-stabilized adhesive strips, I corrected, watching the network display shift from red to green across the galaxy. And technically, we used them to hold together the manual bypass systems we installed, which are working perfectly, Will added, making final notes in his notebook. Well, imperfectly perfect, which was the whole point. The central control hub had transformed over the last hour. Where before there had been panic and chaos, now there was a steady hum of controlled activity. Alien engineers moved between stations, monitoring the new manual overrides and learning to appreciate the beauty of intentional inefficiency. Network stability at 78% and holding, the AI announced. Estimated time to full restoration of essential services, 12 minutes. We'd done it with 45 minutes to spare. The galaxy's most advanced transportation network was now running on a hybrid system of quantum computing and what amounted to very sophisticated manual switches. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. I still don't understand, VXHAL pulsed. How did making the system less efficient make it more reliable? Because now it can fail safely, Will explained, showing them his diagrams. Each section can operate independently if needed. If one part breaks, the others can compensate or shut down without taking the whole network with them. Like nerve clusters in the human body, I added. If one pathway is blocked, the signal finds another way through. It's not always the most efficient route, but it keeps the system running. The first speaker's crystalline form shifted thoughtfully. And the manual overrides? They seem so primitive, I grinned. Sometimes primitive is exactly what you need. A backup system that's too advanced is just another thing that can fail catastrophically. Speaking of which, Will said, checking his datapad, you might want to look at implementing some of these changes across other critical systems. Your power grid, communication networks. Are they all equally vulnerable? VXHAL's gaseous form swirled with concern. Any system designed to be perfect is vulnerable, I said. Perfection doesn't leave room for adaptation, for learning from failure. For the human factor, Will added with a slight smile. Above us, the final sections of the network turned green. Across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, transportation systems resumed their normal operation. Billions of beings could once again access the resources they needed, all thanks to some intentionally imperfect modifications and liberal application of very advanced duct tape. The Galactic Council will want a full report on these modifications, the first speaker communicated. Already done, Will said, holding up his notebook. Though you might want to add a section about keeping manual backups, and maybe stock up on quantum-stabilized adhesive strips. Just in case, I added, though fair warning humans have a patent on the good stuff. As we prepared to leave, VXHAL swirled closer. One last question. How did you know this would work? I exchanged a look with Will before answering. Because humans have been dealing with impossible problems since we first climbed down from the trees. We learned pretty quickly that the best solutions aren't always the most elegant ones. Sometimes, Will said, closing his notebook, they're just the ones that work when everything else fails. Speaking of which, I added, checking my chronometer, that noodle place in the lower levels should be open by now. Nothing celebrates saving galactic civilization like a good bowl of ramen. The first speaker's mental voice carried a hint of amusement. You just prevented the collapse of interstellar society, and your first thought is about food? Of course, Will and I said together. We're human. And as we headed for the elevators, leaving behind a network that was now beautifully, intentionally imperfect, I couldn't help but smile. Because sometimes the best solutions aren't about being advanced or sophisticated or perfect. Sometimes they're just about being human.